Our top story, one man charged with the murder of an entire family tonight. Investigators laid out their case for a crime they call cruel and horrifying. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Jacqueline London.
I'm Fred Shropshire. This investigation has unfolded over several weeks as police discovered the bodies of a father, mother, and one-year-old child at crime scenes in two different towns. NBC 10's Brian Sheehan is joining us live in Reading with the new details we learned about the suspect and the killing of this family. Brian.
In Lawrence, Massachusetts, a burned body was discovered near the Merrimack River. Investigators quickly identified the remains as belonging to 25-year-old Geraldina Peguero-Mancebo, who had been reported missing days earlier. Evidence from the scene suggested deliberate concealment and destruction of proof. Surveillance footage, phone records, and digital forensics began to outline a pattern of control and deception involving her boyfriend, Johan Baez. Each new lead connected Geraldina's final hours to Baez and his movements on the night she disappeared. What followed was a systematic investigation that revealed calculated planning and an attempt to erase every trace of the crime. The findings exposed not only a single act of violence, but a series of overlooked warning signs tied to their relationship. This case became a point of reference for how technology and persistence brought accountability where silence once stood, and how trust turned fatal. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's begin. Geraldina Peguero-Mancebo was a 27-year-old Dominican-American woman who resided in Lawrence, Massachusetts. She was originally from the Dominican Republic, where she spent her early childhood before moving to the United States with her family in search of better opportunities. Her parents were hard-working immigrants who valued education and stability, and Geraldina grew up in a close-knit environment that emphasized family unity and community ties. She attended local schools in Lawrence and was described as a quiet but focused student. After completing high school, she worked a series of service-related jobs while exploring further education options in health or social care. Friends noted that she was independent, responsible, and driven by the desire to help her family financially. She maintained a modest lifestyle, often spending time with relatives and close friends within the Dominican community. At the time of her death, Geraldina was employed part-time and was considering enrolling in nursing assistant certification classes. Her routine was stable and predictable: work, family visits, and time with her boyfriend, Johan Baez. She was known to be kind, trusting, and reserved. Those close to her described her as someone who avoided confrontation and valued peace, which made her approachable and well-liked in her social circles. Geraldina had been in a relationship with Johan Baez for several months. He was a familiar figure in the Lawrence area, known to some as outgoing but occasionally volatile. Friends had expressed concern about the relationship, noting that Baez displayed controlling behavior and that their arguments had become more frequent in the months leading up to her disappearance. Despite these concerns, Geraldina often dismissed them, saying she believed things would improve. Tensions had reportedly escalated weeks before her death. Some friends recalled hearing about a disagreement regarding Baez's communication with other women. Geraldina confided in one friend that she considered ending the relationship but was hesitant. Family members observed subtle behavioral changes. She appeared more withdrawn and avoided discussing her personal life in detail. The last known communication Geraldina made was through text messages to a close friend 2 days before she vanished. The tone of the messages suggested she was anxious, but did not specify why. Later, her phone activity abruptly stopped. Calls and messages from her family went unanswered. This sudden silence was unusual for someone who normally maintained daily contact with relatives, especially her sister and mother. In the days before she went missing, Geraldina maintained her usual routine. She worked her scheduled shift and returned home as expected. On the evening prior to her disappearance, several witnesses recalled seeing her near a shopping area in Lawrence. She was reportedly in the company of her boyfriend, Johan Baez, and an acquaintance whose name was not immediately released by investigators. According to statements gathered later, Geraldina and Baez had an argument that day. Neighbors overheard raised voices coming from her apartment complex, though it was unclear what the dispute involved. Friends who later spoke to police mentioned that she had planned to meet Baez to talk things out and resolve their issues. This was the last known plan she made before contact was lost. Witnesses reported seeing Geraldina in a vehicle believed to be associated with Baez late that evening. The car was later confirmed to have been in motion near Methuen, a neighboring town, based on surveillance footage reviewed by investigators. After the sighting, Geraldina was not seen again. Her family became alarmed when she failed to answer multiple phone calls the next morning. By evening, relatives began reaching out to her friends, who confirmed that no one had heard from her. The next day, her sister attempted to contact Baez directly. His responses were vague. He claimed not to have seen Geraldina since the previous night and stated that she might be taking space. This response deepened suspicion among her family members, as it was inconsistent with her usual behavior. The following day, the family reported her missing to the Lawrence Police Department. Officers conducted an initial welfare check at her residence and questioned Baez, who repeated his earlier statement. The police began reviewing her call logs, social media activity, and local surveillance footage. Her vehicle was located, but she was not inside. The discovery of her abandoned car elevated the case from a simple missing person inquiry to a potential foul play investigation. On a late summer morning, days after Geraldina's disappearance, a jogger in Methuen, Massachusetts, noticed smoke rising from a wooded area near the Merrimack River. Upon closer inspection, the individual discovered what appeared to be a burned object and contacted emergency services. Firefighters and police arrived at the scene to find the remains of a human body, partially burned and showing clear signs of physical trauma. The body was located in a secluded clearing, shielded by dense vegetation. The crime scene was immediately secured. Investigators observed burn patterns suggesting that an accelerant had been used. There were indications that the fire had been deliberately set to conceal evidence. Due to the extent of the burns, initial identification was not possible at the scene. Detectives collected samples for forensic analysis and began canvassing the area for potential witnesses or surveillance footage that might reveal who entered the area that night. Early police impressions indicated that the killing had occurred elsewhere, with the body later transported to the wooded site. The condition of the remains suggested blunt force injuries preceding the burning. Investigators noted tire impressions near the scene, which they documented for forensic comparison. The Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab was called in to assist. DNA testing and dental record comparisons were conducted over the following days. The results confirmed the victim as 27-year-old Geraldina Peguero-Mancebo. The confirmation was delivered to her family by detectives, marking the official transition of the case from a missing person to a homicide investigation.
It just makes me want to cry. It's horrible.
Berks County District Attorney John Adams holding back tears this afternoon after revealing the disturbing details of the murders of 3 members of the same family.
I don't think that any of us can imagine the tragedy that took place here and how horrific this crime was.
Adams says 61-year-old Jose Luis Rodriguez is facing 3 counts of first-degree murder for the killings of Geraldina Peguero-Mancebo, her husband Junior Cabrera-Colon, and their 1-year-old son Jaden.
Defenseless 1-year-old.
Authorities say Rodriguez confessed to the crimes after detectives used surveillance videos showing his car in the area where one of the bodies was recovered. Adams says Rodriguez admitted to first shooting Geraldina in the back of the skull on September 12th after driving her and Jaden to a brushy field in Ontolani Township.
The defendant then took Jaden down the street and threw him in a lake close to where Geraldina had been killed. The defendant confirmed that Jaden was alive when he threw him face down in the muddy water.
Court documents lay out a potential motive, stating Rodriguez told investigators he planned the killings because Geraldina was taking his money and because she refused to leave her husband, Cabrera-Colon.
During an interview with the defendant the defendant admitted to having some sort of relationship with Geraldina.
Geraldina's family reported her missing later at night on September 12th. Adams says Rodriguez admitted to getting into a physical altercation with Cabrera Colon over Geraldina early the next morning and that it turned deadly.
Rodriguez told the police that during this altercation, a gun was knocked out of Cabrera's hand and that Rodriguez picked up the gun and fired one shot at Cabrera, hitting him in the back of the head.
And that was NBC 10's Brian Sheehan reporting. The district attorney says his office is considering pursuing the death penalty in this case.
Investigators immediately began retracing Geraldina's last movements, focusing on her known associates. Johan Baez quickly became a person of interest due to inconsistencies in his statements and his proximity to the victim before her disappearance. Forensic teams searched his vehicle and residence, collecting items for laboratory testing, including clothing and traces of accelerants. Witnesses in the area of the crime scene later reported seeing a vehicle resembling Baez's near the wooded path around the estimated time of the fire. The discovery of Geraldina's body had a profound effect on the Lawrence and Methuen communities. Though police and investigators maintained procedural neutrality, the brutality of the case generated widespread attention. Local news outlets reported updates daily as detectives continued gathering evidence, piecing together the sequence of events that led from an argument between a couple to a violent and deliberate act of murder. The focus of the investigation then shifted toward reconstructing Geraldina's final hours, determining the motive, and identifying any accomplices who may have assisted in the disposal of her body. Evidence gathered from the scene, combined with digital and witness data, would later form the foundation of the case against Baez and others implicated in her death. Following the discovery of Geraldina Peguero-Mancebo's partially burned body in Methuen, Massachusetts, law enforcement initiated a multi-agency investigation led by the Essex County District Attorney's Office and the Methuen Police Department. Detectives immediately began processing the crime scene, collecting trace evidence, and securing the area for forensic analysis. Early assessments indicated that the victim had been subjected to extreme violence prior to being set on fire, suggesting a deliberate attempt to conceal the crime. Detectives began the standard procedure of identifying the victim's last known contacts. Family members were interviewed first. They confirmed that Geraldina had last been seen days earlier and had not returned home or responded to calls and messages. Friends and acquaintances were questioned, and investigators quickly learned her ongoing relationship with a man named Johan Baez. Several witnesses described tension between the couple and mentioned previous arguments. This information positioned Baez as a person of interest early in the investigation. When detectives interviewed Baez, they noticed immediate inconsistencies. He initially stated that he had not seen Geraldina for several days, but phone records showed multiple communications between them within hours of her disappearance. Further analysis of digital data revealed that Geraldina's phone had last pinged in an area near Baez's residence before going offline. Baez's phone likewise showed activity that aligned at the same time frame and general location, contradicting his statements. Investigators obtained surveillance footage from nearby streets and businesses. One video captured a vehicle matching Baez's car, traveling toward the wooded area where the body was later found. Another camera showed the same vehicle returning hours later, appearing to have a damaged rear panel. These findings, combined with phone data, reinforced suspicion that Baez was involved. Forensic teams continued to gather evidence. Items later connected to the crime included a gasoline container found in proximity to the scene and fragments of burned fabric consistent with the victim's clothing. DNA testing confirmed that the remains were Geraldina's. A witness came forward stating they had seen Baez with another male individual near the area on the evening before the body was discovered. This witness provided a description of the second man, later identified as an acquaintance of Baez. As investigators reviewed digital messages, they uncovered a series of text exchanges between Geraldina and Baez that suggested escalating conflict. One message indicated that Baez had demanded to meet her in person to resolve an issue. This communication occurred shortly before her phone went silent. Detectives began to establish a possible motive centered on jealousy, control, and retaliation. The pattern of behavior, coupled with physical evidence, pointed to premeditation rather than spontaneous violence. Reconstruction of the timeline placed Geraldina's final movements on the evening she met Baez. Data from her mobile device and witness accounts confirmed that she left home expecting to see him. She was believed to have been coerced into meeting him under the pretext of reconciliation. Once at the location, evidence suggested she was attacked. Forensic examination determined that her injuries were inflicted prior to fire, indicating that she was deceased before being set alight. Investigators theorized that Baez, with the assistance of an accomplice, transported her body to the secluded wooded area in Methuen. Tire tracks found near the scene matched the tread pattern of Baez's vehicle. Additional testing revealed gasoline residue on the soil consistent with the accelerant used in the burning. Burn patterns on the victim's remains and nearby vegetation suggested multiple ignition points, confirming an effort to destroy evidence. The accomplice, later identified as a friend of Baez, became a critical link in the investigation. When interviewed, he initially denied involvement, but later admitted to being with Baez on the night in question. He claimed Baez had asked for help disposing of something, and only later realized the gravity of what was happening. His statement provided investigators with insight into the sequence of events. Geraldina had been killed elsewhere before her body was moved and burned. The autopsy conducted by the state medical examiner determined the official cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the head and neck, followed by post-mortem burning. There were no signs of gunshot wounds. The report noted fractures and bruising consistent with a violent physical struggle. Toxicology tests revealed no substances that could have incapacitated her prior to death. These findings established that Geraldina was killed by direct assault before being set on fire to obscure the evidence. Meanwhile, media coverage began to intensify. Local stations reported on the brutal nature of the killing, though authorities withheld certain forensic details to protect the integrity of the case. Public pressure increased as the community demanded accountability. The story began to circulate across state and national networks, turning the case into a focal point of discussion regarding domestic violence and relationship-related homicides. With mounting evidence, detectives obtained a warrant for Johan Baez's arrest. He was taken into custody without incident after being located at a relative's residence. Upon arrest, Baez maintained his innocence, claiming that he had not seen Geraldina recently and suggesting that others were framing him. However, the combination of digital, forensic, and witness evidence contradicted his narrative. Police presented cell phone data logs, surveillance footage, and the testimony of his accomplice, all of which placed him at the scene. The accomplice was also arrested and charged as an accessory to murder and for evidence tampering. During questioning, he provided further information about Baez's actions before and after the killing. He stated that Baez had expressed anger toward Geraldina over perceived betrayal and had planned to confront her. Following the confrontation, Baez allegedly requested assistance in disposing of the body. Investigators corroborated portions of this statement through physical evidence, including traces of gasoline and DNA found in Baez's car. Prosecutors formally charged Baez with first-degree murder, arson, and obstruction of justice. The secondary suspect faced accessory and tampering charges. In court appearances, Baez appeared composed but uncooperative. His defense counsel attempted to discredit the witness testimony, arguing inconsistencies and claiming coercion during police questioning. Despite this, prosecutors highlighted the digital trail, the sequence of phone pings, GPS data, and communication records, as irrefutable proof of his involvement. Interrogation transcripts revealed that Baez's statements shifted multiple times. Initially, he denied any contact with Geraldina. When confronted with phone evidence, he claimed she left after a brief argument. Later, he suggested that others could have harmed her. Investigators viewed these changes as an effort to deflect responsibility. His accomplice's cooperation strengthened the prosecution's case by establishing a clear narrative of intent, action, and cover-up. During pretrial hearings, the defense proposed a reduced charge, suggesting the death was accidental and that the burning was an act of panic. The prosecution rejected this, citing evidence of premeditation, the extent of violence, and deliberate destruction of evidence. Forensic analysis further indicated that items found at the crime scene, including burned personal belongings and fuel traces, could not have been coincidental. The motive of control, and jealousy remained the central theory. As the case progressed through the court system, authorities emphasized the calculated nature of the crime. The evidence showed that Baez's actions were intentional, methodical, and designed to eliminate traces of the victim. The accomplice's eventual cooperation provided the final confirmation of the sequence of events, solidifying the prosecution's case. Baez remained in custody pending trial, facing life imprisonment without the possibility of parole if convicted. The investigation into Geraldina Peguero-Mancebo's death concluded that her killing was an act of premeditated violence driven by jealousy and control. Every stage, from the digital trail to the forensic reconstruction, revealed a deliberate effort to lure, kill, and conceal. Law enforcement's coordinated approach ensured that the evidence chain remained intact, resulting in comprehensive charges that reflected the severity of the crime. The arrest marked the end of the investigation phase and the beginning of a legal process aimed at securing justice through factual, methodical prosecution. Following the arrest of Johan Baez, the case of Commonwealth v. Baez entered the pre-trial stage, drawing extensive attention from both the local and Dominican-American communities in Lawrence, Massachusetts. The brutality of Geraldina Peguero-Mancebo's death and the attempt to destroy evidence through fire made the case one of the most disturbing in recent Massachusetts history. Media outlets reported every development, and the courtroom remained under constant public observation. During pre-trial hearings, prosecutors outlined the evidence against Baez and his alleged accomplice. Investigators presented cell tower data, digital records, and witness statements linking Baez to the wooded area where Geraldina's body was found. The defense team attempted to suppress certain pieces of evidence, arguing that the search warrants for Baez's vehicle and phone were improperly obtained. The judge ruled the search is valid, allowing critical evidence to remain admissible. Community members gathered outside the courthouse, demanding justice and calling for stronger measures against domestic violence. Several advocacy organizations began following proceedings closely, highlighting patterns of abuse that often escalate into fatal violence. The trial formally began with the prosecution establishing the timeline of events surrounding Geraldina's death. Jurors were presented with surveillance footage showing Baez and Geraldina together hours before she disappeared. Phone records demonstrated multiple calls and messages exchanged between the two, ending abruptly the night she was killed. Forensic evidence established that Geraldina suffered blunt force trauma before her body was set on fire. Accelerant residue found at the scene matched containers recovered near Baez's residence. DNA traces located on fragments of burned clothing further connected him to the crime. Witness testimonies played a central role. Friends of the victim described previous arguments between Baez and Geraldina, indicating that their relationship had deteriorated in the weeks leading up to her death. One witness testified that Baez had expressed controlling behavior and made threatening comments about her seeing other people. Digital evidence became another cornerstone of the case. Investigators recovered deleted text messages where Baez accused Geraldina of betrayal and demanded to meet her in person. GPS data from Baez's phone placed him at the disposal site within the window of time investigators believed the murder occurred. Several moments during the proceedings stood out for their impact on the jury. One came when forensic experts displayed photographs from the scene and autopsy results, confirming that the fire had been intentionally set to conceal the crime. The courtroom fell silent as jurors viewed images documenting the extent of the damage. Another critical moment occurred when the prosecution introduced a recorded interrogation in which Baez initially denied involvement, but later changed his timeline multiple times. The inconsistencies undermined his credibility. The defense argued that Baez panicked after discovering Geraldina unresponsive and tried to dispose of the body out of fear, not guilt. The prosecution countered that the deliberate attempt to destroy evidence indicated premeditation. When Baez took the stand, he denied killing Geraldina, stating that another person was present that night. No supporting evidence confirmed this claim. The judge warned the defense about introducing speculative third-party accusations without factual basis. Members of Geraldina's family provided testimony describing the last time they saw or spoke with her. They confirmed she had expressed fear about her relationship but had not anticipated violence. Family members detailed the search efforts after she went missing and the devastation upon learning of her death. Their testimonies were factual, emphasizing the timeline of communication and the events leading to the police report. Prosecutors used this information to reinforce the timeline of Geraldina's disappearance and to show that Baez was the last known person with her. The defense sought to introduce reasonable doubt by claiming there was insufficient physical evidence directly proving Baez struck the fatal blow. They argued that the condition of the body made it difficult to determine the exact cause of death, and that investigators focused on Baez too early, overlooking other potential suspects. They highlighted the lack of eyewitnesses to the act itself and questioned the reliability of cell tower data. However, the prosecution presented consistent and corroborated forensic evidence linking Baez to the scene, weakening the defense's argument. After closing arguments, the jury received instructions to deliberate on charges of first-degree murder, arson, and obstruction of justice. Deliberations lasted 2 days. Jurors reviewed forensic reports, digital message timelines, and testimonies from witnesses and investigators. On the second afternoon, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. Baez was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The court also issued a secondary conviction for arson related to the destruction of evidence. During sentencing, prosecutors emphasized the calculated nature of the crime and the extensive steps Baez took to conceal it. The judge described the act as deliberate, cruel, and an assault on the dignity of human life. Legal analysts noted the case as a clear example of successful digital forensic integration in homicide trials. It also reinforced Massachusetts' strict stance on domestic violence-related homicide, establishing precedent for the use of technological evidence in similar cases. Following the verdict, Geraldina's family released a brief statement outside the courthouse. They thanked law enforcement for their persistence and stated that justice had been achieved through the legal process. They requested privacy and expressed hope that the case would raise awareness about early warning signs of abusive relationships. In Lawrence, the community expressed visible grief and outrage. Candlelight vigils were held at city parks and near the courthouse. Community leaders called for increased resources for victims of intimate partner violence. Public discussion centered on how the warning signs in Geraldina's relationship had gone unnoticed. Residents questioned whether earlier intervention from friends, neighbors, or authorities could have prevented the crime. Several advocacy groups organized events throughout the region in her memory. Local organizations collaborated with domestic violence prevention centers to distribute information materials and establish a support hotline. Schools and youth programs introduced awareness sessions emphasizing safe relationship practices and how to report potential danger. The case came to symbolize the hidden dangers of coercive relationships and the necessity of taking threats seriously. It also demonstrated how digital evidence, texts, calls, and GPS data can reconstruct a crime with precision even when physical evidence is compromised. Investigators later acknowledged that Geraldina's earlier complaints and messages indicated fear, but no formal reports have been made to authorities before her death. Analysts identified this as a recurring issue in domestic violence cases. Victims often withdraw from seeking help due to fear of retaliation or disbelief. Policy discussions emerged within Massachusetts law enforcement agencies about proactive approaches when warning signs are detected, including stronger community reporting systems. Local and national media followed the case extensively. Outlets such as the Boston Globe and NBC Boston produced in-depth features tracing the investigation's timeline. True crime programs later covered the story, emphasizing the role of technology in solving modern crimes. Social media played a major role in public engagement, with hashtags related to Geraldina's case trending during key trial dates. Online forums and discussion boards analyzed evidence as it was released, reflecting the broader digital culture surrounding criminal justice narratives. Geraldina's name became associated with awareness efforts against intimate partner violence. Nonprofit organizations established scholarships and memorial initiatives